Hi, I'm Tara, and welcome to Let's Do Books. Email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with any questions or comments, or come join the Facebook group, The Lesbian Review Book Club. People who listen to the show probably know by now that I'm Canadian, so I'm especially excited to be joined by an author who's also Canadian. Tracey Richardson is the author of more than a dozen books, and the latest is Heartsick, which is out everywhere. Welcome, Tracey.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is great. I'm looking forward to this.
So, you're here to talk about the big question of where to set books. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, I haven't really heard much discussion about this topic, but when you think about it, setting can play such an important role in a book. It's in some cases, it's almost like another character. In other books, it's more like a decoration that you don't really notice. But to me, setting really boils down to the story. So the story you're writing, could it take place anywhere, or does it need to take place in a certain geographical location or within a certain culture? Those are all things that, as an author, you have to think about before you start writing. So, for instance, my book, Delay of Game, which was set in the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, obviously that whole setting is, crucial to the story. So, to me, it really comes down to story. And other books I've written could really have taken place anywhere. It's not that important where it's taking place.
So, you are with Bella Books.
That's right.
Who not only publishes their own books, but they actually distribute on behalf of all of the major lesfic publishers.
Right, so they distribute all over the world.
Have they been able to give you any kind of insight into where the biggest lesfic markets are?
So certainly their biggest market, and I think for all lesbian fiction is true, is the United States, followed by Australia. And then after that, it would be Europe and Canada.
Do you find that affects your choice of where you're going to set books? Like, is that something that you're thinking about?
I have to admit that when I first started writing lesbian novels, I think, instinctively I knew that the U.S. market was the biggest market. And I felt at that time, this is early to mid 2000s, I felt at that time that really it was probably a good idea to set my books in the United States, since that was the biggest market. Also for me, being Canadian, I grew up probably, 30 kilometers from the border. I grew up, watching American television and listening to the music, reading their books. It wasn't that difficult for me to set a book in the United States. Also, other authors I've talked to, they've said the same thing, that when they're starting out in their writing careers, they sort of get lured into setting their novels in the United States to really try to crack that American market. And then sort of later, as you get more well-known, maybe more confident in yourself, then writers will set their books, in their own countries, or maybe even other countries.
Do you think you'll ever write a Detroit book?
No, but funnily enough, my next novel I'm working on is set in Windsor and Essex County, which is right across the river from Detroit, as you know, because I know that you grew up in the same area as I did.
It's true. That is where I grew up, and I had a very similar experience to you because I grew up in that same area. It really is that, like, I'm Canadian, but I didn't feel like I was Canadian until I moved away from that area because all of my media was American.
Right. I've had the same experience for sure.
That's also part of why I was so excited reading Delay of Game, because, there's a scene where a couple of characters are walking through the university that I went to, and then later on in the book when they're training at the University of Calgary, it's like, well, that's where I live now too. Like, it's so exciting because there aren't many lesbian books in Canada, let alone my hometown or my current hometown. So it was really cool because I'm used to reading about like small town USA or Los Angeles or New York.
So it's kind of serendipitous for you to read about Windsor and then Calgary in the same book.
It's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah, and my next novel I'm working on, that you asked about Detroit, and it's set in Windsor, but interesting enough for me is when I was growing up in the 70s, Motown music, where I grew up, was huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a song that, a Motown song that's actually inspired my next book. And so Motown is a kind of a thing in this next book. So it totally made sense to set the book in that area, but I wanted to set it in Canada as opposed to Detroit or Michigan, because, as I said, Motown music was just as big, in Windsor as it was in Detroit. So why not set it in Canada?
Absolutely. My mom was still playing it in the kitchen when I was growing up in the 80s, so it was a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. But on the question of, we were talking about, how important setting is. I just finished a book not long ago that it was a lesbian novel, and it was set in New York City, but there was never anything that really put you in New York City. Like, there were very few references to landmarks, or like I had to ask myself a couple of times, oh yeah, where is this novel set again? And so, for that particular story, it didn't really matter which city it was in. But as a reader, I still wanted to be sort of taken or transported to that city and at least have a little bit of that flavor of Manhattan or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
How do you feel as a reader about reading of other cities?
I love the books. Yeah, I love the books where the setting functions almost like another character. I think some of the best ones that I've read like that actually take place in Australia.
Okay.
So one of them is Storm Season by Pene Henson, and it's the Australian version of the Snowden romance, except it's rain, because it's at least a part of Australia where I don't think they get snow. And it's this woman who gets stranded at a cabin with a recluse in a rainstorm, and it's this like gorgeous atmospheric writing that just puts you there and is so perfect. And then the other is Cheyenne Blue has her Girl on Girl series, and two of them are set in Australia. So there's Not So Straight Sue and Fenced-In-Felix. And then there's also a sequel to Not So Straight Sue called Almost Married Moni. And they all take place in the Outback, and it just feels like every photo and movie and everything that I've ever seen in the Outback. So, being in Canada and never having actually experienced those terrains, it was really cool to feel like I got a chance to do that.
Right. So it's, I think the reader in a lot of cases wants to be, you want to be taken on an adventure, right? You want to be, it's escapism, you really want to go to that other place for the time that you're reading that book. And I mean, to do a good job writing a novel, you want the reader to forget they're reading a novel, if that makes any sense, and so that it almost seems real, and that brings me to the point, if you are going to set your novel in another country, like, you've got to have some authenticity. So, I mean, certainly the internet makes it a lot easier to research other countries and other cultures, but my own little rule about setting a novel in a different city, in the United States, is that I have to have been to that city and spent some time there. That's not true of every author, maybe, but I think that authenticity is important. And actually, it's an escape for me too, right? Like, if I only ever wrote novels that were set where I live or where I'm from, like, that's not, like, I have to spend, 10 months working on a novel and immersing myself in that. And so I kind of want to escape as well and visit, in my mind, spend time in another city. So that's one of the other reasons that I do set some of my novels in the United States, for instance. It's not just because of the the American market, but because, the cities I visited there I really enjoy, and I want to put my characters there as well.
So do you tend to choose a city after you've been there, or do you sometimes say, I think I might want to set a book in this place, and then go on a trip to experience it?
Usually it's after I've visited the city. Although when I went to Vancouver a few years ago, I knew that I wanted to set a novel there, and so I think that was the one exception where I intentionally, wanted to visit that before I set my novel there. But usually it's after I've, vacationed or something in a city.
That's very cool. Do you think ebooks have actually made any kind of a difference in reader acceptance of different settings?
I think it probably has to some degree, because when you think about, the accessibility we now have fairly cheaply to novels from different parts of the world, from authors from different cultures and backgrounds. I mean, it's all out there, for $3.99 or whatever. And so I think readers are, it's like a buffet out there, and I think readers are taking advantage of that. I also wonder, and I don't know if I should bring this up or not, but, with the current political climate in the United States, I'm wondering if readers are sort of even more open right now to wanting to escape to another country, like reading a novel set in Canada or Australia, places that tend to be, in recent years, a little more open to gay marriage and gay rights and, sort of more left-leaning countries. So I'm wondering if that is influencing where readers are going. I'm not sure.
That's a good question. I think it's definitely possible. I think it's driving a need for escapism anyway. And I think that's why romance has always done well. And I think romance is going to continue to do well, and is probably going to do especially well during this particular administration. And I think that's why we're also going to see other escapist genres like thrillers and possibly even sci-fi really pick up in lesfic, because people need to get away from their Facebook feeds and their Twitter feeds and the news and all the stuff that's going on. And it is kind of nice to know that if you pick up a book that is set somewhere else, you're probably not going to hear the name Trump. Like, it's just unlikely to come up. So I think there is something to that. At the same time, I also think, blessedly, a lot of authors, even as they continue to set their books in the US, are leaving that away and are writing that beautiful, pure escapism where we can all have our happy endings, regardless of what your government is doing or what is going on in the news. So I'm hopeful that we're going to continue to see more books set in other places. The thing that's kind of cool with having the Lesbian Review Book Club is that we truly do get to interact as a readership that is global. And even if you look at the crew that's running the Lesbian Review, I'm Canadian. Sheena, who's the site owner, is South African. We have reviewers from New Zealand. We have some from the US. We've had some from the UK. We have one that's in Trinidad. Like, it's very cool. So because we're an international group of reviewers that are a part of an international group of readers, are quite eager to read books set in other places.
It is a small world, isn't it? The lesbian fiction world. It's getting smaller all the time, I think. In a good way.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it helps that there are a bunch of really great Facebook groups. Like, obviously I'm biased towards ours, but there are some others that are fantastic, or even sometimes just based around like one author. They'll pop up to buddy read a whole bunch of people together to read one book. Like, it's a very cool, engaged community.
Do you find that when you're reading a novel set in a different country or is about a different culture, I mean, of course you're getting wrapped up in the story, but do you find that you're learning things that you enjoy? Maybe you're learning about some of the food, or I don't know, whatever. I mean, is that important to you as a reader?
Yes, because I don't want the sanitized version. Like, I know that sometimes, even when books are set in other places, the language will get a pass just to make it more palatable for an American audience, I think is the best way to put it.
Right.
I actually don't prefer that, especially if it's somewhere that I've been, like in the UK, like in England or in Scotland, and I know that they don't say some of those American words. Or if I've read enough Australian books, that's one of the things that I really like about Cheyenne Blues books, is that they're very, like, the language is very Australian. That's actually part of what helps the setting become a character, is letting that happen.
Right.
If that all gets pulled out, then it feels like it could have been set somewhere else. Like, it could have just been small town USA, or it could have been big city USA, if they're talking the same as all the characters do in the American books. I think another book that was quite interesting was Bunny Finds a Friend by Hazel Yeats, which is set in Amsterdam.
Okay.
And it's the only lesfic book I've ever read that's set in Amsterdam. And I believe the author is from there as well. And I read it so long ago that I don't remember many details, but I just remember going and looking up things about the places so that I could see it. Like, it was one of those where the setting did matter. It wasn't one that could necessarily be dropped somewhere else.
Okay.
And it worked very well and was very cool.
So, yeah, I mean, you're right that, you know, sometimes the novel, you know, it doesn't really matter where it's set, and the story can go on. It's a story about the characters. I mean, story is what happens to characters. That's basically the definition of story. And so where you have the locale is a basically just a set decoration versus almost like an active participant in the story. And I mean, for me, I sort of let the story dictate how much of the location, how big a role the location is going to play in my novel. I think I would be really scared to actually go and set a novel in some far-flung country that I have no experience in. I mean, I know of Australian writers and writers from overseas who have set their novels in the United States without ever really even spending much time there. And I mean, you can do so much internet research and watch YouTube videos and so forth, but I don't think I would be that brave, you know. I think I would be so afraid I would just not have that authenticity. I mean, that's just my own fear. Because one thing as a reader, you know, if you stumble across something that, you know, isn't authentic or is even a mistake in a novel, I mean, it's so jarring. It's like you've just thrown the reader into like a cold, you know, pool of water when they've just been feeling all warm and fuzzy. So, and then they remember at that point, oh yeah, this is a book, you know, this is something that someone wrote, as opposed to this is like really happening and these characters really exist. So I think I'm too afraid of making those kinds of mistakes if I were to write something, a place that I had never visited or spent any time in. I mean, I don't know. Maybe maybe I have like a lot of errors in my books I don't even know about. That nobody's told me about. You know that. Anyway, that's my thing.
No, I suspect that the best way to make something like that work would actually be to hire a sensitivity reader who lives in that area,
right?
Who can read it for you and who will be able to. Because at that point, if you're talking about not just a city, because yeah, there are details that you can get wrong about setting things in the US, whether it's to do with like laws or the makeup of like how many white people are in this city versus how many people of color and where those people are from and whatever. And so there can be cultural nuances there. But when you're talking about a book that's in a whole other country with a whole other entirely different cultural set, like it's not just nuances at that point, although it's also nuances. So I think you would need to have an expert reader and also be able to be very open to their feedback and adjust based on what they're saying.
Right. I mean, if you look at the American South, you know, I can hop in a car and be in Tennessee in 12 hours, but I mean, like, it's a whole different world, right? And our histories are so different, not just between Canada and the United States, but parts of the United States versus parts of Canada can just be so different. And yeah, you're not going to pick up everything on like a week-long vacation to Tennessee or something. So absolutely, it's a great idea to find some readers from those areas and say, hey, can you help me out here?
Yeah, especially because we might think that somebody's being nice to us when they say bless your heart, but they're actually
mocking you or something.
Oh yeah, quite condescending, or
yeah, that's true.
They think you're dumb. So, are there any settings that you particularly love to read about in lesfic books? Because I know that you're quite an avid lesfic reader as well.
Right. For me, I think it's more about the story. What story is going to appeal to me and what characters are going to appeal to me. So I'm really a character-driven reader and writer, I hope. So I would say for me, like, setting is less important as a reader than it might be for some people, right? And I guess I get annoyed as a reader if a novel spends too much time like trying to prove that it's really set in this other country, like where you could almost just like read a travel book if you wanted instead of reading a novel, right? So you don't want it to take over the novel, I guess.
That makes sense. I feel like a great example of the opposite of that, and it's going to be strange that I'm choosing a historical one, so bear with me, but I'm going somewhere, is Alaskan Bride by D. Jordan Redhawk. And I think actually, a better contemporary one would have been Broken Trails by D. Jordan Redhawk. Because I think what she does so masterfully is she can take readers through settings that aren't necessarily familiar to them, because let's be honest, Alaska is not going to be familiar to anyone except people in Alaska.
Right.
And really make it feel like we're there and we're getting it. And with both of those books, it involves characters who grew up outside of Alaska and are coming in and are experiencing it from very different perspectives. But we get to experience it alongside with them in a way that feels natural and not like she's just dropping information on us.
Yeah, the last thing you want is an information dump, right? And I almost envy like the sci-fi fantasy writers, because like they get to build their own worlds, right? Which has its own issues, because that's a lot of work, to build your own world. But at least it's all your imagination versus, walking into another country and that somebody out there, some reader out there is going to say, no, they don't actually talk like that, or this place doesn't really look like this, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I mean, I'm not an author, so either way, I don't need to worry about it. But I think if I were, I would be concerned about things like ensuring consistency in your world that you're building, like making sure that things make sense. And that I think there are people that they'll categorize their books as science fiction when actually it should probably be almost more like a science fantasy, or speculative fiction, because like the what if works, but like it doesn't actually hold up from a science perspective, and that would just stress me out. But that's why I'm better off reviewing books and not writing books.
And then historical fiction too. I mean, talk about a lot of work. I mean, research, and you can't just go visit, World War II in London, England during the Blitz and see what it was like. So
No.
Yeah, that's, I would like to try a historical novel at some point. I wrote a short story for an anthology that was set during World War II and during the Allied bombing campaign over Germany. And this is for like a 3,000 word short story. And I can't tell you how much research I had. I mean, I read like 7 books and watched like about 25 videos and like just for a short story. So I can't even imagine. And like I said, like if you don't get something right, I mean, I swear there's people out there that like just like go and Google like something from your book to see if it's let's see if she's got that right.
Oh yeah, without question. That's definitely happening.
That's intimidating. Now I'm scared. Yeah. Now you got me scared.
Well, I didn't say I was gonna do it. Just that somebody else will. So, is there anything else you want to share about how you go about choosing settings for books, or any other just kind of thoughts on this topic?
One thing, that I think about is, as a Canadian, am I being sort of unpatriotic if I don't set my novel in Canada? Like, should I be doing more? Should I be bringing, Canada, a little more Canada into my work? And maybe I should be. Like, I've written a couple of novels so far set in Canada. Some of my characters throughout my novels have been Canadian, even though the book might be set in the United States. But I'm starting to feel some internal pressure to actually, to share more of Canada in my books. And I think I've established myself enough that, I hope anyway that my readers will follow me back into Canada. And I don't know, I guess we'll see, because my next book is totally set in Canada. So, and all the characters are Canadian. And so for all those people that love these Canadian accents, maybe they can sort of hear those when they're reading my book. I don't know. We'll see.
I am so excited about this book. So excited. When is it? Are you writing it now?
Yeah, I'm writing it now. It's called I'm Gonna Make You Love Me, which is named after a Motown song. The Temptations and the Supremes did that song together. So it should be out late 2018.
I cannot wait. I will wait. I won't even be obnoxious and bug you about it in the meantime, but I cannot wait.
I'm sorry, there's no Calgary in it. I'm not taking you back to where you live now this time.
That is okay. I hear that you're actually maybe going to set a scene in my actual hometown, the town where I grew up and spent my whole childhood and adolescence. I have written a scene set probably like right, a few blocks from where you went to high school and stuff. That's pretty cool.
Isn't that cool?
That is so cool.
We'll see if the world is ready for a little more Canada. What do you think?
Woo! Better be.
Better be.
It's our time, right?
I think so. And I think that if you write about your home with all your heart, people are going to love it.
Right. And if you write characters that people are going to fall in love with, they'll follow those characters, I think, anywhere you want to take them.
Exactly. So, I think that's all for this episode. Thank you so much, Tracey, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Oh, great. So, where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
Well, I have a website, www.traceyrichdson.net. I'm all over, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at trich7117. Instagram, I'm out there. My books are out there, Bella Books.
All right. So, I'm Tara. You've been listening to Let's Do Books. Remember to email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with your questions or comments. If you're an author who's interested in joining me on the show to talk about lesfic you love or the trends that have you interested, please let me know. If you've enjoyed this episode, please check out the show notes where you'll find a Patreon link for the Lesbian Talk Show. Just a little bit would go a long way to cover hosting costs for the Let's Do Books and the other great shows on the channel that are all geared towards queer women. You can find this and many other great shows by searching for the Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, or Stitcher, and you can find all the podcasters from the channel on Facebook in the group The Lesbian Talk Show Chat Group. You can also join our Facebook group, The Lesbian Review Book Club, to talk about these books and anything else you're reading and loving. Ta-da! I don't usually screw up my own scripted, and that's the point of scripting it. God. I'm only halfway caffeinated.